The process of making an icon is a process of living out on something concrete of the good news. Because on an icon, and I'm teaching a class in Tom's River now, so I'm kind of up to date on this. You start with the blank, which is endless possibility, and at the same time, it's utter chaos. Because there's no point of starting, there's no choices that have been made to order the chaos. Then you make an image. You draw the image on the blank board, which starts ordering the chaos. And then you incise the image, you use a sharp tool and put it in the board, because part of the process is going to hide your drawing. And that teaches us that the image that God implanted in us is never lost, no matter what goes on top of it. And then, and I guess this is the way you learned it, you start with your darkest colors first. And I never studied egg tempera in art school, so I don't know if this is the way you normally paint egg tempera. But when you paint with other mediums, usually you start with a middle tone and then you add lights and darks. In egg tempera, you start with your darkest tones, and then you slowly add layers of light. And I made these up a long time ago, so they're a little bit crude, but they show what happens as more and more layers of light are put on top of the darkness. It takes form, it becomes alive, but the darkness is never destroyed. It's simply transfigured. The process of painting an icon is such a journey of hope. It's so much preaching the good news that there is just no comparison between Da Vinci's wonderful Madonnas and an icon.
I think that if I were to define what makes an icon, back to the original question, it is certainly a very rigid set of precepts that are required. The Raphael painting can't be an icon because it doesn't have the things that are formally required for it to be. So of course we want to imbue it with the spirit, and there is a sense as an iconographer that one has that I am just the vessel. It is not about me. It is not about my ego. It is about translating these rigid precepts that are supposed to be there through me onto this surface. And so the second part of that is intent, because it's not only applying the precepts, but then having the intention that this is to be an icon, that it is to be created in that sense. And there's a lot of work that can be spiritual or of a religious subject that does not have those intentions. And walking that tightrope in the 21st century of saying, I want to do something that is familiar and yet new, and that is a very contemporary notion. Iconographers traditionally did not sign their work. We do have some examples of some very great painters like Rublev who developed identities because their work was recognizable. And I would argue that if you go around the room, if you look at these icons, you can tell that Christine's are Christine's because they do. Her personality does come through.
Absolutely.
But there is a fine line in there. In the 20th century, there was definitely a rise of celebrity among artists, and I think that has maybe for iconographers especially muddied the waters a little bit. And there is a question of finding a happy medium. And I guess I answer all of these. I do occasionally do traditional work for traditional environments. When I do church commission work for a wedding, it's going to be most often very traditional. On a few occasions I have had people come to me and say, I want you to push it. I want you to explore what it can be, but still function as an icon.
On writing briefly at the School of Sacred Arts, the thing that I really took away from it was that you cannot paint a good icon and still have your ego. That you have to surrender your ego, and it's a struggle between you and what you think you want to produce and what your materials want to do, whether the gold is going to stick, whether it's not, whether you can let go of yourself enough to let God pour through. And so I've always taken that lesson with me whenever I make anything. I don't plan. I try and make myself an empty vessel. I try and just sit there and allow myself to be led and allow the materials. Like, I love to work with clay because clay has this living, breathing sense about it. It is filled with microorganisms and particles. It is teeming with God's light. And when I work with clay, I feel like it's telling me, it's God's voice telling me this is what I am supposed to be doing. So there are times when I'm working and I will think I want to do something and I'll really try and it just won't work and it won't work and it'll be falling apart. And I realize, that's my personality, that's my ego, I'm trying to control this. And then I let it go and the peace flows through me. And so in that sense, I think there's a similarity in spirit, even though I don't, my form is more letting go completely than using the structure to force myself to let go, but it's the same underlying principle.
Mm-hmm.
To really agree with what Sybil was saying and really just be really supportive and say go Sybil, because this idea of how important it is to, with our work, take a stand really for beauty, for order, for harmony, in a world that the media, the visual media, is really dominated by dark forces. And it is the responsibility of we artists to stand up with our work and to show the opposite. I mean, at this point, Christianity in the visual world, in the art world, is a counterculture. And however, it is countercultures throughout history that have changed in a grassroots kind of way and maintained that higher spiritual reality, which really is a necessity for people to live. I think we'd be seeing far less teenage suicides, we'd be seeing far less of the violence that we have in our culture if our culture was once again dominated in the visual arts by people, artists who really manifest God's presence in art through beauty and through harmony. I think there was a shift that happened when there was the First and Second World War. There was at the beginning of the First World War, there was a flowering in art. There was a flowering with with Picasso, with Matisse, with you had the Cubists. You had really a beautiful thing happening. But when the wars came, it was devastating. It was devastating for everyone, but particularly for our creative culture. It was blown away. And when that happened, and people started trying to recover from the wars, that was when, in philosophy, Nietzsche became predominant and influenced the Dadaists. He influenced Picasso. And remember, like, one of the key phrases that Nietzsche had was, "God is dead."
Bless you.
Remember that? That's horrible. And that, from that place on, that thought has been manifested, and I think we see in our culture today the devastating effects of that thought. And that, yes, it is not popular in the art world to have the presence of God in your artwork, but John the Baptist faced that problem too, didn't he? It wasn't popular, but it is important to the evolution of our culture. So I just wanted to share that. I think, to me, that is like, it's like key. I mean, it's a driving force, really, because, I think that within the structure of traditional iconography, you learn the dynamics of spiritual energy and how it operates within a visual surface, within a two-dimensional surface. And, when you see people like I did at the Metropolitan exhibition of all the icons, from Mount Sinai years ago. You see people who don't even know anything about the Christian faith standing in front of these icons. I know that they are receiving God's presence. You know, they do it non-verbally. And they do it because when you receive through your eyes, it goes straight to your heart. And so there's no argument. You don't have to get into a theological debate. So, you know, it's really important, I think, to have more and more artists rise up. And it doesn't have to be in the exact form of an icon, but icons are just about the most complete way I know of expressing the theology in visual form. So thanks. I just really wanted to say that.